The energy industry is undergoing transformation like never before. Forbes Magazine and UtiliPoint International have teamed up to take you up close and personal with the people making this transformation happen. This is the Great Transformers.
Welcome to another series of the Great Transformers. I am Nana Bafo, the CEO of UtiliPoint International, and it is my pleasure today to speak with Fred Krupp, who is the Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Fund. Fred, thank you very much for doing this.
Happy to be here, Nana.
This is an exciting time to be in the energy industry. And with all the changes that are going on, one can't help but wonder how the whole industry is going to look like 10 years from now. And from where you sit and all the changes that you've seen and been very actively involved in, how do you think the landscape for the energy industry looks like, say, in 2020?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of changes even just within 10 years. The whole world is moving fast toward a clean energy economy, which opens up enormous opportunities and means that there'll be major changes. One, I think every household will be using much less electricity, but getting way more services for the electricity that is used. Two, I think you'll see coal-fired plants both retired but also retrofitted so that carbon is being captured from the smokestacks along with all the other pollutants, mercury and the particulates, as well as NOx and SOx. Three, I think you'll see much more renewable energy, both wind power, solar power, as well as geothermal being used in both central generating stations and I think also on a distributed basis. I think you will see new power lines having been built. I hope we will see at least some significant sections of superconducting new power lines seen. That's probably a little more speculative by 2020. So those are just the beginnings of the changes that I think we'll see in a very short time, a decade. When you're talking about, as you know so well, the heavy capital investments that are needed to make these things happen, a decade's a short time, but I think this is going to be a decade of exciting, really revolutionary change for the energy industry.
As I hear you go through the things that you mentioned are going to be transformative, and this series has been going on, as you know, for a while now, and I've had the privilege to speak with a variety of thought leaders like yourself across the spectrum. And some of the themes are recurring. But you mentioned renewables, you mentioned carbon capture, you mentioned the consumer having a lot more services, you mentioned high conducting transmission wires. The one thing that I did not hear you mention that I've heard through the series is nuclear.
Well, nuclear, you know, the carbon dioxide problem, the global warming problem, in my judgment, is so significant that all of the low carbon sources or zero carbon sources need to be on the table. And if the nuclear industry can make strides in bringing the costs down, which has been, I think, the biggest obstacle to plants being built, and also if the nuclear industry, together with the government regulators, can figure out how to safely process or contain the waste, then absolutely nuclear will have a bigger place in the future, and we may see that within even one decade as well.
And there seems to be a role for everybody or most of the key participants to play. Government certainly has a role, industry has a role, the consumers, we also have a role. What do you think are going to be some of the significant challenges that both government and industry would have to overcome for us to get to this vision of 2020 that you so eloquently put out?
Well, the biggest challenge is, you know, one of the things we're dealing with is an air pollution problem. Carbon pollution is just another form of pollution, and we haven't solved these problems anywhere in the world without putting a legal limit on how much can be put into the sky. So the sulfur dioxide problem, where we've made great strides in the last 10 years, we've made those strides because government put in a driver, a cap, a declining cap in place. And the biggest challenge government needs to overcome is to figure out in a bipartisan way how to, on a national basis, put in a declining cap on carbon pollution. That's the first thing. For transmission lines, we need to figure out a way to site these lines and overcome some of the NIMBY phenomena, but do it in a way that's environmentally sensitive and respects the fact that there are some places where we shouldn't have lines. There are some places where we shouldn't have solar power plants or even wind turbines. But I say that in the spirit of being constructive and knowing that we have to find the places where they're very appropriate, where they're not in corridors of migratory birds or pose other problems. And I think this will be another challenge government needs to overcome. So, I mean, I could go on, but I think those are two of the significant challenges. Maybe a third, Nana, would be information. We've got to empower consumers with information. We've got to have the sorts of meters that give information both to the consumers and the utilities and the grid as a whole to move the electrons, where they're needed, and to give us the flexibility within the electric transmission system and the information and the intelligence that we're accustomed to having in the internet, but will be such a new and positive thing for the much older and a little bit stuck in its ways electricity grid that so far is not designed or constructed to be intelligent.
And then from an industry perspective, what do you think industry has to overcome?
I think, we've already touched on the fact that the nuclear industry is going to have to figure out ways to produce and build plants that are less expensive to build particularly as well as to maintain. And we'll have to come up with answers to the public's concern about waste. I mean, many people in the utility industry for a long time believed that some of the objections, including nuclear waste, was kind of a public relations thing. And if they could just get, an environmental group or, an actor to say, this is a good thing, don't worry about it, their problem would be over. But I think there's a growing awareness that there needs to be a substantive solution that's convincing, and it's not merely a matter of some public relations artistry. But I think there's many people that I've talked to now in the nuclear business who understand that. There's many challenges, but I think the good thing is there's enormous momentum and a recognition by people in the industry and by our citizens that our economy will be much stronger when we're using energy more efficiently and exporting dollars to the Middle East and other places which have hostile regimes and folks that intend to harm us when we're exporting many fewer of those dollars.
That leads me to the next observation. I haven't read your book, Earth, the sequel, but from the little previews that I have been able to glean off of it, it appears to me that you are making a strong argument for economic development through the transformation that's going on in the industry. And from that perspective, so you look at the U.S. from a clean tech innovation perspective, and you look at the rest of the world, how do you think about U.S. competitiveness vis-a-vis Europe or China or India as some of the big players in the clean tech revolution?
The United States has slipped, and as an American, it's something that concerns me. We used to have many of the top companies in the solar business right here in the United States, both innovating, designing, and producing. And now we see China in the lead position. And when you look across the technologies, this is true for 3 or 4 of the top renewable technologies where we no longer are leading. But we can lead. What's made America great ever since the Industrial Revolution is that technology and innovation and great engineers and entrepreneurs have built the American economy as the strongest in the world. And now that the world is on the verge of transforming our energy economy, what better place, what better opportunity for America to put itself back in the driver's seat economically in the world? You know, some people say that the new clean energy economy could be as big as the internet. That's not true. It will be way bigger. The amounts of money involved to build power plants, to retrofit homes and businesses are enormous. And the jobs that will be created are enormous. You know, you cannot export the job of retrofitting a coal power plant to sequester carbon. You cannot export the job of constructing and assembling a nuclear power plant. You cannot export the job of retrofitting 130 million American homes, putting insulation in the roofs, replacing the windows. And by the way, those windows are all manufactured in North America, mostly right here in the United States. Some come in from Canada, but these are American jobs and American families that will benefit. So while America has slipped, we have what it takes for this to be the engine that gets us out of this very, very serious economic decline that we've been in, with unemployment rates in double digits, people out of work. Many have even stopped looking for work. We need a driver, and this is it. But we need to have the smart policies that unleash these forces. And we're on the verge of that, because the House of Representatives has already passed a comprehensive energy and climate law, and the Senate is due to consider this in the first part of 2010. So I'm hopeful that we'll get this done.
I tend to share your views on the size of the opportunity, and by some estimates, and in particular the Energy Information Agency estimates that I've seen, numbers like 6 trillion or so are being thrown about in terms of the amount of investment that will be needed to complete the transformation in the next 20 years. So I think the opportunity is huge. But coming back to the ability for the U.S. to take back its leadership in innovation from where it slept, it seems to me that when you look at some of the industries for which the U.S. has been very preeminent in leading, like financial services, like technology, like telecoms, there was a wave of deregulation that happened to make competition be unleashed and so forth. When you think about the mismatch of regulatory framework that governs the electrical power industry in the U.S., are you comfortable that that innovation that we also desperately need can be unleashed against the backdrop of what is, to some extent, chaotic regulation?
Yes. Well, you know, the electric industry is one where we need regulation, and the government's got to be involved to protect consumers. There's no question in my mind about that, and we saw some of the bad things that happened in California and other states when Enron and others manipulated the situation and profiteered. Having said that, I also think properly regulated markets will be very important to unleash creativity. And right now, I would agree with the premise behind your question, I think, Nana, that the regulatory structures stifle innovation, and they need to be, while maintaining proper regulation, they need to be opened up. Well, just one example of that would be the pricing. We need to either have the regulatory agencies create new pricing models themselves, or allow for new pricing models to be developed so that consumers who use electricity at night when it's plentiful because of the steady state productions from hydroelectric facilities or nuclear power plants, consumers can get rewarded for shifting their clothes washing or dishwashing to the evening hours. And right now, those sorts of opportunities, those sorts of incentives, those sorts of flexibility for that sort of pricing is available in way too small a fraction of the country.
I'm happy you mentioned the need for information to get to the consumer. At UtiliPoint, we have taken a position that this transformation is going to be best unleashed when the consumer has information and has the power. Now the power is in the hands of the utility. And having the consumer get more of that power and that interactiveness, we believe is the way this is going to work best. But staying on the topic of regulation, what do you think about the possibility in not so distant future of climate change regulation? And how are you and the EDF working with the Obama administration to facilitate some type of regulation?
Well, we already have regulation, of course, in the RGGI states in the Northeast. We already have regulation, a cap in place also in California. And there are about 30 states that have some form of carbon pollution regulation. But I believe that we very much need to have that be a national system and a national cap for a whole lot of reasons. And the good news is that the president has spoken about this while he campaigned, after he was elected, in his inauguration, and in almost every press conference he's had since, because he believes that doing something about climate change is important whether or not you accept the science of climate change, because of the economic renewal that it will mean for the country, both in terms of creating jobs and lessening the export of our dollars to the Mideast. And so I have had the opportunity to talk to the White House as recently, as yesterday, and I can tell you that in 2010 the White House will, make a drive for the last step of the process for a comprehensive energy and climate law to get through the Senate. And I'm very optimistic, having talked to many of the senators, that they are constructively engaged, and we'll see the votes that we need to pass something in the Senate, get something through a conference, and signed by President Obama this year. One of the things that makes me so optimistic is the emergence of the conservative Republican senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, as an advocate for change. And he comes with an ability to talk to other members of his caucus and get them to be constructively engaged. What would it take for other senators in the middle of this debate and in the middle of our political spectrum to get on board? And those conversations are happening every day. One of the things that makes me optimistic is Senator Byrd from West Virginia a few weeks ago, and just a week ago, Senator Rockefeller from West Virginia, both saying carbon regulation is coming, and urging the coal industry in their state of West Virginia to constructively engage. We can do this in a way that's practical and incremental, that works, but people have to get involved. That's what our political process is all about. So I see those conversations happening, and when I see senators like Lindsey Graham and Robert Byrd and Jay Rockefeller encouraging their constituents and colleagues to get involved in a constructive way, that tells me that we're over that hurdle, and this is now inevitable. It's just a question of what the final shape will be that pulls together the votes we need to get this through the Senate.
The fact that we have a significant election year in which we are doesn't temper or change that optimism that you have.
Well, there's always elections coming up. We elect our congressmen every other year in this country, so there's never an election far away. And from my interactions with many congressmen or senators, I think they're always thinking about the next election. But the good news is that there's the potential, given the op-ed that Senator Graham co-authored with John Kerry a few months ago, for a comprehensive energy bill to include not only many of the topics that we've been talking about, but also items like increased drilling off our coast done in a safe way, and incentives for nuclear power, I would hope, also done in a safe way. So this broad tent that's been constructed by the people that are getting together to fashion new legislation, I think is broad enough that this can be done in a bipartisan way, and that lessens the anxiety about 2010 being the year of an election, because both parties can get credit. Right now the poll ratings of incumbent congressmen in general are very low. They need to bring home the bacon in terms of doing some things together that prove they can rise above the nasty partisanship that Americans are repulsed by. And here's an opportunity that I think they're going to take. I think the debate will unfold in a way that's different from health care.
There are those that worry about the significant cost that would have to be incurred, and whether it's energy efficiency and weatherization of homes, whether it's deploying smart meters, whether it's coal capture. In a difficult economic climate, there are those that say the impact and the cost savings impact and the energy savings impact of a lot of these things are on the come. And what do you say to those skeptics about all these transformation stuff that are worried about the costs that in the end are going to be borne by you and I and everybody else?
Point one, this law has to be good for the American economy. Otherwise, it's not going to be passed, and even if it is passed, it won't maintain support. So whatever is designed and put into place has to be good for creating jobs and bringing electricity to homes at affordable prices. Point two, there are enormous opportunities to design a law that's right and that works. And one of the things that makes me so confident is that a lot of the things we're talking about mean using less electricity, and that represents savings, not by getting less services, but by using electricity more efficiently. And the other point, Nana, is when I spend time with some of the CEOs of the big utility companies, like Duke Energy would be one example, Jim Rogers tells me about a $25 billion capital spending plan that he has, that right now he can only proceed on parts of it. Why? Because there's such uncertainty about what will be the shape of carbon regulation. And he and the other CEOs talked to me about the fact that when you pass a law, suddenly the gates open and we're able to put people back to work in this country building new power plants because there's certainty as to what the rules will be. That is going to be the immediate effect of this law, and the cap wouldn't even go into place for 4 years or so. So any small increase in electricity rates, which would already be more than offset by the fact that you'd be using less electrons, that's years away, while the jobs impact will be triggered the moment the utilities have the incentives to and the certainty that they need to release these capital budgets. We need that. America needs that now.
It seems to me that one of the biggest assumptions that we all have to buy into is the fact that consumers, if given the right information and so forth, would be incentivized to use power wisely. And from my perspective, I don't know if I can venture to say that they will use less power, but I hope that they use it wisely. And I say this to say that when you think about the average American consumer, sometimes one has to wonder whether the will is there to transform how we use energy. And from that perspective, what do you think the efforts of the government, perhaps organizations like EDF, and even the utilities has to be vis-a-vis consumer education?
Well, I think, first of all, we cannot expect consumers to go to grad school to figure out what they should do. We've got to make this, as easy as eating a piece of apple pie. I'm not big on the idea that we can demand that people take a lot of time out of their already busy daily lives to get a graduate degree. So the new meters, the new systems, the new incentives have to be easy, simple. Well, we can do that. And the experiments like the Pecan project in Austin, Texas, or what's happening in Boulder, Colorado, will give us a learning, not only NGOs, but the many, many companies that are involved in these experiments as to how to make it easy for people. We can't be giving folks an added burden. We have to be saying, this is a way you can save money and have more money to go to the movies or go bowling or do whatever you want. And then people will jump on board. We won't have to tell them they need to eat their broccoli.
I think that would be interesting to see the transition from the pilot stages, which is what most of these efforts are, to the large-scale deployment stages. And UtiliPoint has been involved in some of these pilots, and you are right. Some of these learnings are quite interesting. And as we help our clients deploy them across the country, it will be interesting to see how that experimental lessons can be deployed across the country. From an EDF perspective, and you have the benefit of having been there for 24 years, when you look back about some of the changes that have happened and some of the positions that EDF has taken that you've been strong in, how do you compare this particular period that we are in to any other period in your 24-year tenure at the Environmental Defense Fund?
Well, there's a few things. First, the environmental challenges are much more substantial than ever. We've learned so much about global warming that we know we have a huge problem and we've got to get on it right away. Second, the opportunities to come together across different constituencies and stakeholders are way more than ever before. Years ago when we first worked with McDonald's, it was considered heresy for an environmental group to be working with a big company. It was first thing we did with them was on the issue of the styrofoam box that hamburgers used to come in. Then we worked with them on getting antibiotics out of chicken feed. Now there's 90% less antibiotics being fed to poultry nationwide than there used to be because of McDonald's leadership in this area. So there's so much water under the bridge that now it's commonplace for businesses to see the advantages of working with NGOs and NGOs to see the advantages of working with business. And there's a constructive can-do mentality not only on these individual projects but also on the frontier demonstration projects that you've referred to, and maybe most importantly, on the policy entrepreneurship. And so when you have Duke Energy and AEP and the Environmental Defense Fund and NRDC all supporting similar cap-and-trade policies, when you have the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, US CAP, on the web at us-cap.org, all having come behind some very specific recommendations, not only a call to action, but a year ago, a blueprint for action. This has never happened. You look at all the big environmental statutes, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Superfund Act, never was there this degree of industry support for Congress moving ahead. So this year, 2010, presents us with a phenomenal opportunity that's way different than in prior years that I've been at EDF, and Lord knows we need that opportunity because the problems we have, both economically and environmentally, demand solutions.
On that note, I want to thank you very much, Fred, for spending some time with us in the Great Transformers series and listening to your thoughts about how is it that we can all be part of the transformation that is going on in the utility industry.
Thank you, Nana. It's been a pleasure.